Okay, good morning. Hopefully you can see my screen there. So this is our agenda for today. I'd like to just talk a little bit about what social communication or pragmatics means, and then walk you through some tools and informal checklists that I have that I will share with you in a Google folder later that are helpful for guiding your classroom observations or for some of you in-home observations. Then I have some more formalized things that can be used for teacher or parent interviews, as well as you could probably fill out some of those yourself if it's a student you've been working with for a while. And then there are some other informal things that we can do in an individual student setting, so whether that's pull out to the speech room or whether you're doing a student interview. And then if you have questions, we can talk about those as well. So for some of us, I wanted to just talk about what social language or social communication or pragmatics is by definition. So here's the ASHA page on that, and I will share that link with you is in the agenda, so I will put that on in the Google folder as well. But as a reminder, pragmatics is addressing three areas. One is the use of language for different purposes. Second would be the ability to change the use of language according to who's listening or the environment that you are in. And then the third one is following rules for conversational kind of topic maintenance or storytelling, not doing things that are unexpected. So just to review each one briefly, ASHA has listed some examples of using language could include greetings. So kids with social communication deficits may not initiate a greeting. They may also not respond to greetings or farewells. Informing, you guys know that as a purpose of communication, making demands or requests, making promises, things like that. And you're probably also familiar with changing language. I think the most common example of this is what they have listed for the first one. That's what I always think of is those, toddlers already know how to talk to a baby differently than to an adult in some cases. You'll need to know, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. I'm going to turn that over. This one, sometimes kids with social communication deficits will presuppose too much or too little. So the next one says giving background information to an unfamiliar listener. So some kids might come into the speech room and think that that they went to Adventureland over the weekend and just start talking about it without giving context. Some kids might do the opposite, like giving you a lot of information on something that's more common knowledge. And maybe adjusting communication style or volume or tone for the classroom versus the playground versus the library. Other things to look for in kids that you're wondering about their social communication skills would be those rule-based things, like we do take turns in conversation. Not my greatest skill, but we're supposed to. We are not supposed to introduce random topics that are not at least tangentially related to the conversation. So that ability to use maintenance, repair communication breakdowns, watch for and use nonverbal communication. This also gets into proximity. Not that you would identify someone for an IEP goal just because they stand too close to you, but it is a piece of kind of what's expected, what's typical in a social setting for communicating. In the last one listed, there's facial expressions and eye contact. You guys know kids that fall on the autism spectrum are going to struggle with all of these things, but sometimes we have other kids who have a social language disorder or their social language is affected by their expressive and receptive language abilities. Just a note there that these can vary across culture. So I will, like I said, share this link with you as well. The kids that we are sometimes screening might tell stories in disorganized ways, which kind of goes back to just expressive language or narrative retell. But they often say things that are inappropriate and maybe don't have the awareness that they're not appropriate, which sometimes it's a fine line to tell between, is this an attention-seeking behavior versus is this really, I don't know, that what I'm doing is not typical. And having little variety in language use, so using the same kind of repetitive statements over and over. So again, like for any language disorder, we would want to, in order to say this is a pragmatic language disorder or a concern that we want to evaluate, we would want to see these issues in multiple settings across environments. Anything to add on that? Okay, so then I've got this first one that you can use for conducting observations is called the SORF checklist for red flags, and it comes out of Florida State University from the First Words Project. This is really kind of a very rough screening tool for autism in general. So you will see that word autism on there, but I think if you look specifically at the communication piece, it might guide your observations for the younger kids. So that's the first one under A, is impairment in social communication and social interaction. So they're talking about deficits in social emotional reciprocity. And I'm not going to read all of these to you today, but these are some tools you can look back on. So for your little guys, lack of response to name is going to be a big red flag. Also, when you see those parents and caregivers that are trying so hard to engage these kids and really they're more interested in objects or toys versus a back and forth attention giving and receiving. They're also going to list some things for you for nonverbal communication that you might want to look at. Again, talking about autism specifically, you'll see a lot of kids use someone else's hand or body as a tool without a joint reference. So a lot of leading you to things, using your hand to point to things instead of doing pointing on their own. So there are some other areas if you're looking at autism as a whole on this one-page sheet, but for the purposes of today, I just like to point out some of those communication factors. And jump in if you have anything to share or that you've used in the past. Then we have available these autism checklists that there's about 6 of them, I believe. So those address the areas of behavior, sensory, other kind of developmental rates, but there is one page that's specific to communication. So I can see taking something like this into a classroom setting or playground, lunch, PE, and observing a student and just noting, were these observed, not observed, or were they used incorrectly? So some of these, again, just a general difficulty communicating in a social way, using behaviors, maybe negative behaviors instead of words. Many times you'll see a weird prosody or an unusual prosody, like I've had as many kids who speak in a sing-song tone as who sound more monotonous or who sound robotic. Echoing things back to you that you've just said or things they've seen on TV is going to be a red flag again. And then that pronoun reversal is common. So having confusion about me and you or you and I, things like that. Has anyone used this one?
No.
Okay, well, I will make sure that that is shared with you as well.
Rachel?
Yes.
This is Sally Legletter. I just joined a few minutes ago.
Hi, Sally.
Hey, when you're talking about some of these checklists, and this is so timely because I just started writing a social pragmatic goal for a 2nd grader.
And I'm going to pause you for a minute so that you know I am recording this one. So if there's any information you want to save for when we're not recording, you can do that too.
Okay, all right. Ran across something, didn't know the communication lab profile. It's got something that you've ever used, or where it might fit into your discussion, or if there's something better?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I have not used it. Sally, do you feel like it's appropriate for a screening tool, or is it more of an evaluation tool?
I think it could be a screening tool. I'm gonna grab out my copies. It's more of just a simple checklist of things. I'll find it so I can talk more.
Okay, I'm going to add it to the list so that I remember to look it up or contact with you as well.
Okay.
Okay. So some of you have probably been waiting to talk or hear about older kids. And I do like, when I'm observing in classrooms, to pull the Iowa Core for ELA. So as an example, there are these I can checklists, and I can provide you that link. But it's a nice way to track the skills that have been taught but not mastered. So, I mean, we can't say there's a deficit if the child hasn't been taught a skill necessarily, but I feel like I can pick out a lot of these areas that do relate to social skills or trouble with non-literal or non-verbal language. And so I just grabbed the 6th grade one as an example because I know some of you are working with middle school. Things like, I can refer to the text to support my thoughts and draw inferences about a story. I think inferencing is going to be a very hard thing for kids with a pragmatic language disorder. I can use details from the text to determine the theme or message of a story. In kids with social communication deficits, they are going to be very detail-oriented, but they're more list makers, so they might remember several things from the story, but they don't see how that makes a whole or how it makes a main idea. Again, I won't read all of these to you, but it's nice to always remember that, our purpose in the academic setting is to ensure academic progress, but language and communication tie into a lot of these things. I can explain how an author develops the point of view of the narrator or speaker in a text. Wow, if you can't take perspective as a child, then it's really going to be hard to take this perspective of an author who you haven't met or talked to. So that's another tool you can use, maybe as a teacher interview or to guide your observations. Okay, then getting back to the little guys again, there is the CSBS DP Infant Toddler Checklist. And I should have that here. And this, I think the early childhood people are fairly familiar with this one. It is a little bit more formalized, and it's great to use as a parent interview. But I think you could also bring it for yourself and go ahead and look at some of these areas, especially communication, and note if you're observing them or not. Getting needs met appropriately, having that back and forth social interaction, like trying to get you to laugh or trying to get you to tickle them so they'll laugh. So again, some of these pieces, I feel like there is overlap between social skills and social communication. But this is another one that you can use. And I also have, it does get a little bit into comprehension. And then I have a sheet on how to use it that I will also share with you. And that looks like this. Has anybody used that one?
I've seen that one before. I think I've used it probably way back in my few years ago.
Okay. The next one comes from Scott Bellini, and I have sent him on share screen. You probably can't see my video very well, but I'm holding this blue book that's called Building Social Relationships. And some of us who did some video modeling training at the state level a few years ago, probably fall of 2010, a few of us went to that and we were given this book as a personal copy. So I think Janelle probably has a copy of this.
I do.
Do you? Okay. So anyway, I may have another copy in the autism library, but what I like about this one is that it brings you through assessment into treatment. And hopefully we'll have future sessions to talk more about treating, but the subtitle says, a systematic approach to teaching social interaction skills to children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders and other social difficulties. So I did a quick scan last night at home, so it's not a great copy of the Bellini checklist. They're interviews. And so if you can see, that first one is a parent interview. And they do categorize it by social functioning versus social communication. I think you could do the whole thing as an SLP, or I think if you want to use it for your information, maybe you just do the communication part. But this is a nice one for older kids. But again, it talks about some of the same things. Does your child ask questions? Do they have a typical tone to their voice or rhythm? How are they engaging in conversations? So that's the parent interview. And then, hopefully I'm not making you seasick with my scrolling, there is a teacher interview of social functioning as well. And then it gets into communication. So a little bit on peer comparison for the teacher here. And then some similar questions that were asked to the parents. The last set is a child interview. So how many friends do you have? Who are your friends? Tell me about your friends. Then getting into emotional recognition. What kind of things make you feel happy? So maybe identifying if they have that vocabulary for emotions. Perspective taking. How do you know when someone else is sad, happy, scared, angry? So that gets into perspective taking, but also reading facial expressions. So there's that one. I didn't see a communication specific part of that one. And that I will share with you as well. The next one is something informal that my former supervisor made up based on what's called Grice's maxims, which you may be familiar with. Let me find it. So this is just something really informal, but it does look at 3 areas of language. It looks at quantity. So are kids giving too much or too little information? It looks at quality, although not in great depth. Maybe we could expand on this. So, you know, what's the quality of their conversational communication skills? And then, 4 areas, I guess. Relation, relating to others, and then manner. And then there's a place for comments. So I have used this one to have teachers and parents fill out. I have also used it in my observation of kids. But it's nice to look for patterns, because if you give it to a teacher and a parent and do it yourself, and maybe to the paraeducator, and then you start to see, no, this really isn't the issue for this kid, or yeah, this is the issue and it's happening at home and at school. So that's a nice to get the check marks filled in by different people and then use it for comparison to talk about if these things happen across settings. And then hopefully from doing some of these screenings, you can be guided in what it is that you'll want to evaluate, if anything. There's also one called Orion's Pragmatic Language Skills Questionnaire, and that looks like this. So you would rate, or have a teacher or parent rate the skill on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being it happens almost all the time and 5 is never. So then you'll look at the areas like nonverbal communication, expressive skills as it relates to social interaction, conversational skills for topic maintenance, conversational skills for turn taking, speech conventions, skills in interacting with peers. So this one is a little bit more in depth. If you already know from your classroom visit that, yeah, we are probably looking at some pragmatic needs, but let's start categorizing them for which areas they affect the students' functioning and other. And again, if you just joined us, I will put all of these in a Google folder for you to access. There are some ways to do some informal interactions with kids to kind of pull out some of this stuff. Sometimes it goes better when you're familiar with the student, but sometimes it's interesting to see how they would interact with a novel staff member as well. And a lot of these ideas come from Michelle Garcia Winner. So the article that I've linked here has a few more ideas than just what I call the double interview. But one of them is called the ILAF framework, and it's just an acronym to remind you to look at these different areas. So these 6 areas, I can't count. You want to look at how kids initiate, whether it's appropriate, inappropriate, or if they don't bother to initiate at all. It talks about listening with your eyes and body. Then gets into A for abstract or inferential language. So interpreting meanings that aren't present. Understanding the perspectives of others. So when you look at all these tools across the board, you're seeing some themes here, definitely. G is for getting the big picture or understanding the gestalt. Again, like I talked about, yes, some kids can remember details, but can they categorize them into a main idea or get the point? And then H is for humor and human relatedness. Can they tell jokes? Can they understand jokes? Do they have a black and white thinking about if you're making a joke, they're like, well, that's not really true. So that's another one, I think, from Michelle Garcia Winner that I just have typed up here. And then I think I have this link open already. This is her website, socialthinking.com. And this is an article I found called Assessment of Social Cognition and Related Skills. And we do have some copies of this book, Thinking About You, Thinking About Me. I have one here at home that looks like it belongs to the Autism Library. And so if you look down, it will give you some guidance on structuring the assessment. So in our case, for today's purpose, we're getting more into observation and screening. But here it talks about observing the student with his peers and in different contexts. So I do think it's really important to go into, you know, some instructional time that has peer interaction, like a science lab with small groups perhaps, and see how the kids function there. And then, so this is what I call the double interview is down here. It reads, the diagnostician interviews the student, and then you have the student interview you. So I won't get into it in too much detail because you can read this on your own. But it's really interesting. We don't typically ask kids to like conduct an interview, ask us questions, but it can be telling if they ask things that are overly personal or if they don't know how to formulate questions at all. Then there's a few more tasks that some of us have seen a few of these things done recently by outside providers, like using picture sequences to talk about how they process language or interpreting social scenarios from photographs. So this might be an interesting one for your reading later. Those are the things I wanted to show you today. If you have things for the good of the group or other things you like, please share those now, and then I'll stop the recording and we should have just a couple minutes for other questions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop that recording.
Rachel?